first time and how hard it can be. Just over here, there's a trophy from a national championship from a little football team that nobody said could win the national championship, and went into West Virginia of all places and got it done. And they got it done in the fourth quarter, and they didn't quit until the game was done. Well, for all those pundits in Washington, I think we ought to tell them about the big cheer here in Grizz Country. We play all four quarters and we don't quit. A woman who knows something about firsts. For 18 years, whether some of us knew it or not, she was fighting for us in Washington, D.C. She was working as the director of Peace Links. She was working on the Every Child by Two campaign. And when her husband retired, she came back here to Missoula. And she didn't stop. She ran for the House, and she ran for the Senate. And of course, I'm talking about Senate Majority Leader Carol Williams. Every day during the last legislative session, I can tell you I don't think there's any more courageous, smart, capable, and intelligent political leader in this state. And we're very thrilled that she is the chair of Senator Clinton's campaign here in Montana. So, without further ado, I want to introduce a woman born in Butte, an adopted daughter of Missoula, a proud parent of 3 great kids and grandkids, the wife of our beloved Pat, and the first woman majority leader of the Montana Senate, Carol Williams.
Thank you, Missoula. Thank you all for being here on such a rainy day. What a wonderful day this is. I am really honored to chair Hillary Clinton's campaign in Montana. She is exactly the kind of leader that Montanans like. She's gritty, she's strong, and she doesn't give up until the job's done, and we're lucky to have her running. I want to share with you a little bit about why I supported Hillary right from the very beginning. I support her because she's devoted her life to helping those at the bottom rung of the ladder, of giving voice to the voiceless, of working hard to alleviate poverty and injustice at home and around the world, working as an activist and an advocate and a public servant. This is not new to Hillary Clinton. As a young lawyer, she focused on children's issues and legal aid. As First Lady of Arkansas, she brought health care to rural areas that had never been there before, and she helped reform the state's lagging educational system. As our nation's First Lady, she had the courage to take on health care reform, and by the way, is the only candidate still in the race that wants universal health care for everybody. Hillary also was instrumental in starting the Children's Health Insurance Program, Early Head Start, the Family and Medical Leave Act, and helped restore a working partnership with Montana and Native Americans. To me, that's inspirational leadership. I am pleased to introduce to you today someone who can speak with great authority about her skills and her competency and her passion. As few others, President Clinton recognized the transition in America that we were facing in the last century, and as it was coming to a close, he gave a new sense of hope and optimism as he built his bridge to the 21st century. Since leaving office, President Clinton, through the Clinton Foundation, has done an enormous amount of work in innovative solutions to climate change, global poverty, HIV/AIDS, and sustainable development. President Clinton, thank you so much for all you've done for Montana and for all your recent visits to Havre, to Great Falls, to Helena, to Butte, to Billings, to Kalispell, and now most importantly to Missoula. I am pleased and proud to introduce the 42nd President President of the United States, William Clinton.
Folks, I'm really honored to be here, and I thank you for coming out on this morning. I've had a really good, interesting stay in Montana this time. I got to Kalispell last night. It was raining like crazy, and there were still 3,000 people waiting in the rain. And so I thought I was doing the crowd a favor. I abbreviated my talk a little bit, and then I started shaking hands. I had to shake hands for an hour and a half in the rain because all the people that were so interested in the election, they asked me all the questions about all the subjects I didn't talk about in the speech. But I was very encouraged because it shows you how profoundly interested the American people are in this election. Everybody knows this is too big to be decided by little things. And I'm very grateful that all of you came out today. I'd like to thank the University Vice President Jim Foley for welcoming me here. I want to thank Secretary of State John Mudd and his wife Michelle. He's been great. He got Hillary on the ballot, and I'm very grateful to him. And I can't say enough about Carol Williams. She's been a wonderful chair of Hillary's campaign here, and her spouse, your former Congressman Pat Williams, one of the best, most progressive members of the House of Representatives. Who are helping Hillary, and I'd like to thank all of you. When I was president in 1995, the University of Montana won a national football championship, and I called the team to congratulate them, and I thought you might be interested to know or remember that you won with a fourth quarter comeback engineered by a quarterback named Dave Dickinson. And the game, and the game was won in West Virginia. Where Hillary won last night in West Virginia by 41 points. And I think it's worth noting that no Democrat has won the White House without carrying West Virginia since 1916. Woodrow Wilson did it. Nobody's done it since, and they were very, very good to me there, but we lost in 2000. We lost in 2004. She is running ahead there. She is running 10 points ahead of John McCain in Kentucky, the state that when the Democrats win, we always win the White House. She is running 15 points ahead of Senator McCain in Arkansas. In all these states, she's the only one who's winning. And I think it's interesting, she hasn't lived in Arkansas in 15 years. And she got 70% of the Democratic primary there, with people saying, why would you vote for somebody from New York? And I'll tell you more about that in a minute, but it's very interesting to me to see how this thing is shaking out. And I think, in a funny way, the fact that she's been knocked down so much, been declared dead more times than a cat's got live, and just keeps kind of coming back, has endeared her to a lot of Americans who are struggling in their own lives and know that she is their champion. So it's very exciting to me to be here in her behalf. I also want to say a couple of words before I get into the meat of my remarks about how glad I am to be at the University of Montana. Because of the leadership of this school in environmental matters, I know you have one of the members of the International Committee on Climate Change, which shared the Nobel Prize with Al Gore last year because of the work. I know that this is one of the top 4 or 5 campuses in America for education in biological and healthcare sciences, and I think that's very important. It's one of the big challenges facing America. And something that I particularly appreciate This is one of the leading campuses in America in giving volunteers to the Peace Corps. And I thank you for that. When I was president, we had the first big expansion of the Peace Corps in many years. And of course, we created AmeriCorps, which has now had over 750,000 young people served, more than in the entire history of the Peace Corps. So this community service is really important, and I thank you for that. I would like to say just one other thing by way of introduction, and then get into the argument I came here to make. This has been an amazing, amazing election. I can never recall a time in my lifetime when we first of all started out with such a good field of candidates. People that were eliminated, let's not forget, have rendered enormous service to this country and deserve the support of the American people and the thanks. We had a very impressive feat. And I think in many ways, many of them were underappreciated, especially Joe Biden, one of the most remarkable people in the entire Congress. And John Edwards, who has done such a good job on these poverty issues. But they were all impressive. And then there's never been a time, at least in my experience, when a titanic contest between two candidates generated so many new voters, so many new workers, and so many new givers. And first all the new givers were going to Senator Obama because he had both more internet comfortable supporters among young college students and upper income people. But then in February, when Hillary started losing all those caucuses and some primaries because she was flat broke and had no money to go places to organize, over 300,000 Americans who had never given any money over the internet, and when they started didn't know how to do it, came on and gave her $30 million so she could continue. So you've had all these amazing things happen. I think it's also a real tribute to the American people that they are paying so much attention to this election that sometimes the intensity of the issues and I hesitate to use the word confrontation, but the unfolding debate has more impact than the money. For example, Hillary was outspent by $4 million on television in Texas and won anyway. And there were some very substantive issues, which I'll talk about in a minute. Outspent 2-1 in Ohio, won by 10 points. Outspent 3-1 in Pennsylvania, where they said, surely this will sink her ship. She won by 9.5 points and carried 61 of the 67 counties. Outspent 4-1 in Indiana, the first state that borders Illinois that she had won. And I think it shows you that there's just this kind of cauldron of debate going on. And I think it's very, very helpful. I wish there were more debates because in many states we come, it's almost like the people in the states had not really been affected by what went on before because it didn't happen right there in front of them. And she offered a debate in every state, and I think it was a mistake not to have it. But anyway, here we are. We're coming to the end of this process. I have two things to say about it, on instructions, if you will. But I agree. We have, all of us, worked too hard, too long not to win in November. So I can tell you that on behalf of my candidate, our family, and our people, whatever happens in this nominating process, we expect to be united in the Democratic Party and working for a victory to turn this economy around. Second thing I'd like to say is, we believe, in view of the incredibly competitive nature of this race, it is legitimate and important to let every state and territory, all the eligible voters vote, and we believe everybody should be counted. There is a very stark difference, for example, in the way the Republicans and the Democrats have handled Florida and Michigan. Although both parties have the same set of rules and could handle it the same way. It is shocking and somewhat embarrassing to me to see the Republicans in a more progressive position than the Democrats, and to see us acting like almost apparatchiks from the 50s. Because in the case of Florida, The Republican governor and the Republican legislature moved the Florida vote up ahead of schedule. The Democrats in the legislature asked that Florida's Democratic primary be conducted on February 5th. Even though it would have been alone, it would probably diminish the turnout. The Republicans laughed at him and left him in. So Hillary said, okay, the rules are we can go down there and have fundraisers, but we can't do public events, and we can't advertise, and I won't. Her opponent bought national cable time to get into Florida anyway, and television in South Georgia, and advertised heavily, and Hillary won anyway, and the Democratic Party said, the Republican Party said, okay, we'd like to win Florida in the fall, so we're going to invoke our rule. They got out of turn. We'll seat their delegates at half a delegate, and seat their superdelegates. That's an appropriate penalty. And they did this, remember. The completely innocent Democrats were eviscerated by the Democratic National Committee and were told, we are going to seek none of your delegates, none of your superdelegates. You don't exist as far as we're concerned, and we'll decide what to do with you after we figure out how this thing comes out. Now, be nice people and go away. Now, I never thought that it would be the Democratic Party that didn't want to count votes in Florida. I thought that was a Republican strategy, or strategery is the case. Do you really believe Florida would be getting this kind of treatment if the vote had turned out the other way? And I think we really have to consider that this is trouble. You know, if we win Florida, it's hard to see how they win the election. It's hard to see how we win Florida if our best argument is we've already ignored you once, now get in line. Now in Michigan, both parties are to blame because the governor signed the legislation moving the primary up, and the two Democratic senators supported it. But the bill arose in the Michigan Senate, where every Republican voted for it, and every Democrat voted against it. But the Republican Party knows that John McCain is popular in Michigan, and would actually have a chance to win, notwithstanding the fact that it's the most hard-hit state in America. So they did what the rules permit. They're seating the Michigan delegates at half delegates. But the Democratic Party, because for a lot of reasons, they've decided to destroy the Michigan campaign and say, we'll just decide later what to do with you, and pretend no one voted. And it has a superficial element of fairness because Senator Obama and Senator Edwards took their names off the ballot. But they took their names off the ballot because Hillary was ahead in the polls and they wanted to play up to Iowa. In other words, no one asked them to take their name off the ballot. And then there was a very organized and funded campaign to get everybody to vote uncommitted. It was for them. So Hillary offered a revote in Michigan. We offered a revote in Florida. In both cases, the other campaign said, no, no revote, we'll just see what to do after this thing's over. Why would we put Michigan at risk and pretend that these people didn't show up and pretend that somehow she is responsible and the voters themselves are responsible and she should be punished for what intermediaries did? So I will say again, the only thing she's asked for in this whole deal is to treat those people with dignity and fairness. It is the voters that need to be paid attention to, not the apparatus. And it's very interesting. I never thought I would live in my life. I never thought I would live in my life to see the Republican Party be more progressive and fairer in the treatment of voters that broke their rules than the Democrats. And that is exactly where we are. And so all she's ever asked for is let everybody vote, count the voters who show up. This is about the people, not the mechanism. If you want to punish them, fine, but don't pretend they don't exist. And don't pretend it didn't happen. And don't pretend that she wasn't willing to let them vote again and help raise the money to let them vote again. And that it was stopped by other people. So if we're going to decide a closely held contest, it shouldn't be decided with those kind of tactics on those kind of principles. We're Democrats. We're supposed to be about the business of empowering people. This should be a great empowerment election. And how ironic it would be, after so many people have been empowered through internet giving and active participation, if the thing would be decided by the most disempowering, top-down, and I think mindless decision I can recall in a month of Sundays. So that's where we are. So I ask all of you to think about that, because this election, I will say again, is too big to be decided on little things. So I think there are two questions. One is, who'd be the best president? The other is, who's the most likely to win, because we've gotten in a lot of trouble to put this thing at risk. I'll leave the second one to you. You can just look at the surveys in Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, Arkansas, Missouri, and a number of other states, and draw your own conclusions about that. Let's talk about who'd be the best president and why. From the point of view of a student at the University of Montana, you are moving into a 21st century world that is obviously full of enormous promise and excitement. And it's much more interesting than any previous period in American history, and all you have to do is look around this crowd to see. This is a more diverse crowd than it would have been 30 years ago. By race and ethnicity, by religion, more mixed in gender, a lot of age variation. It's a more interesting world that we live in if you're well equipped to make the most of it. But the 21st century world has three enormous problems. It is profoundly unequal. It is unstable because of terror, because of the threat of infectious diseases spreading, because of narco-trafficking, because of trafficking and treating people like slaves, because of all these things that are happening in the world that destabilize things. And it is completely unsustainable because of global warming. We cannot continue the present energy patterns in the 21st century without serious adverse consequences. So we have to look at this presidential race from your point of view in terms of not only what are we going to do tomorrow, but what will America and the world be like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. In the United States, the biggest question, I believe, is how to deal with inequality so that the people are emotionally free enough to deal with the insecurity and sustainability issues. This country has gone dramatically more unequal in the last 7 years, where 90% of the economic benefits have gone to the top 10% of earners, and even more staggeringly, 43% to the top 1%, and a big chunk of that to the top 1/10 of 1%. We used to criticize Latin American dictatorships in the 60s for this kind of inequality. This is the worst increase in inequality in the United States since the 1920s. That's why, that's why most Americans think they're already in a recession, because they are. That is, the technical definition of a recession for a nation is 1 day more than 6 months of negative economic growth. Most American families have had way more than 1 day more than 6 months of negative economic growth because their incomes are flat and their costs are exploding. So let's just take a little snapshot profile of America today compared with America in the 90s when you gave me the opportunity to serve. In that 8-year period, we had 22.7 million new jobs. In this period, 5 million. 5 million, less than a fourth as many. A perfectly predictable result if you put 90% of the growth in the hands of 10% of the people. In that decade, almost 8 million people moved their way from poverty up into the middle class. In this decade, 5 million have fallen from the middle class back into poverty. In that decade, median family income after inflation across all racial and regional lines rose $7,500 a year. In this decade, median family income after inflation is $1,000 lower today than the day I left office. While energy cost up $2,000 a family, healthcare cost have doubled, college cost up 75% nationwide, the average debt of a college graduate up 50%. This year alone, it is estimated that the average car will cost $450 more to operate. That's based on $3.50 gas, so it's going to be more. And that average food bills for families will go up $250 to $300 because of energy prices. And that average cost won't touch Montana because it's further from here to there, wherever there is in this state than most places. Right? So that is the setting in which this election occurs. Therefore, when you ask yourself, Who would do the best job of rebuilding the middle class, giving poor people a chance to work their way into it, and reclaiming the future for America's younger generation? You have to answer that question in terms of what the real world is like today for most people. So here's my argument for Hillary. First, she has a plan for 8 million new jobs that cannot be outsourced and that are completely consistent with our long-term objectives to fight climate change and build a sustainable future. 5 million green-collar jobs to be funded by repealing the subsidies that never should have been given to the big oil and nuclear companies in the first place. Which she is the only candidate who voted against. It was called the best bill corporations could buy and a pinata of perks. She wants to put that money into a fund, eventually put $50 billion in it to finance 5 million jobs in energy efficiency and clean energy projects. And let me just say, this is the only strategy that will create jobs in every state, in every region, in every big city, every suburb, every small town, and every rural area in America. Let's just talk about how it might affect you. For example, I fly over Montana just like I flew over eastern Oregon last Sunday. And what I noticed in eastern Oregon, I noticed a lot of Montana. The wind was blowing like crazy, and there was not a windmill in sight. Now, why is that? The Energy Department actually has a study which says enough wind blows from West Texas to the Canadian border with Montana and North Dakota to electrify all of America. Now, we can't do that because it would cost more than $1 trillion to rewire our entire electric system. But the point is, when the yesterday energy people tell you that there is a severe limit on how much clean energy we can generate from the sun, from the wind, from geothermal, from biomass, from tidal, they are only talking to you in terms of the energy grid that exists today. The truth is that the potential for America seizing control of its own energy destiny and generating more clean energy that will lower utility bills, create jobs, and save the planet is much, much greater than you were told. So one of the things that has been very important for Hillary in this campaign, and ironically, one of the reasons she won both Texas, which is the #1 producer of electricity from wind in America, and New Hampshire, is that her plan calls for the establishment of smart, efficient power grids that will take the hookups to where the wind blows hardest and most consistently and the sun shines brightest. You could do a lot more with that in Montana, and it would be very, very good for you. I'll give you another example. We should actually close every landfill in America and use the garbage either to make ethanol or biodiesel or to generate electricity. There are any number of places in America, and New Hampshire has all these old closed timber mills. They can't be reopened as timber mills, but they could be reopened as power stations with organic material, if, but only if, there were transmission lines there which efficiently hooked up the production of power to the electrical grid. You just think of what it would mean to our country if we could get rid of our landfills. What it would mean to the local environment as well as to the long-term health of the planet. So you could get a lot of jobs that way. Second thing, even more jobs could be secured if we were to make as energy efficient as possible every school building, every college building, every government building, eventually every home in America, every auditorium, every hospital. The Energy Department has a study on this which says if we went for maximum building efficiency, tough new building standards, upgraded the standards for efficiency of 15 major appliances that haven't been raised in years, and got rid of all the light bulbs quicker, we wouldn't have to build another new power plant in America for 40 years. Goldman Sachs gave me a study last year that said if the United States, China, India, and Russia were simply to reach the current energy efficiency standards of Japan, it would take us 25% of the way home to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050. And there are millions of jobs in this, none of which can be outsourced. I'll just give you an example. Our foundation does this work all around America and all around the world. We are now working with the New York City Public Housing Authority, upgrading the efficiency of all these old buildings. We have 11% of America's public housing in New York. The electric bill every year is $500 million a year. We are going to cut it to $350 million a year. That is a 30% reduction in greenhouse gases. We're going to create hundreds of jobs. The entire bill will be paid by lowered electric bills. We'll pay all the cost off then, and everybody will have the lower electric bills. We'll have clean power. We will give back free power to the power company, and we will generate all these jobs. We have a partnership with colleges and universities in America. One of the reasons you wanted Pennsylvania is that I was able to point to what was going on at Allegheny College. They're already building new buildings and retrofitting them all with our foundation as a specific example of what she would fund on every college campus in America. 6% of America's greenhouse gases are generated by universities. Because they're energy-intensive places, right? The computers are whirring all the time and lots of other stuff, and there's a lot of bodies around here. So this is a really important thing. We can mobilize America and create millions and millions of jobs, saving the planet and lowering power bills. 3 million of her jobs would come from promoting more efficient use of what we're already doing, upgrading our rail lines. You're going to have a big increase in rail traffic for energy and environmental reasons. More efficient technologies on highways and bridges and streets and water systems. Clean water will be a very big issue, and using water efficiently will be a big issue. We can create 3 million jobs out of this. None of them can be outsourced, and they're all making a better future. So that's my first argument. One last thing, we have to move to a transportation system where we simply get around with less oil and eventually with none. We have to. Because you can argue this right around whether Hillary or Senator Obama are right about whether we should divert funds, oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to provide short-term relief for 6 months for people, and let the oil companies, instead of the taxpayers, pay the federal gas tax. The reason I think Hillary's right on that is I've literally met unbelievable numbers of Americans who are caught in a current vice. They're choosing every single day between filling up their gas tank to go to work and putting food on their children's table and buying medicine for their family. And so this is a genuine emergency for them, and the petroleum reserve is full. We don't need any more oil in it. But whatever you think about that debate, no one can promise you to make the price of oil go down again unless we all quit using it. Because the fundamental problem here is there's a limited amount of oil and more people can afford to buy it. All around the world. And if more people can afford to buy it, they're going to bid the price up. So Hillary believes that the next president should do 2 things quickly. Number 1, give significant benefits to the auto companies to rapidly scale up their production of higher mileage vehicles at today's technology. There's a big rush today among people who can afford to do it to buy higher mileage cars. But last week there was a published list of what these cars are. There's only one American-made car in the top 3, a Ford in 3rd place. And I have to defend Detroit a little on this, because they've tried to do this twice before. When the price of oil spiked, and every time they do it, we go buy their high mileage cars for a month or 2. Oil goes down, then we go back to SUVs and Humvees or whatever we get in and guzzle as much gas as possible. And they are left holding a very big bag because it costs a fortune to retrofit these production lines. Now this time they're not going to do it, but we need to really get these production lines up, and not just for small cars, but for SUVs, for pickups, eventually even semis. We're all going to have more fuel efficient cars. We drive at home a hybrid mini SUV that Mercury makes. It's about 40 miles a gallon in town, about 30 on the highway. So we're going to have to do that. Then, as quickly as possible, and she believes maybe within 2 to 3 years after the next presidential election, we should be able to make available to you a very high mileage vehicle. There are any number of technologies already developed that have just not led to mass production, which would get you there. And I will just give you one example. A couple of months ago, Hillary called me from somewhere on the campaign trail, and she said, "Bill, I met a guy in the last couple of days who swears he is driving a car that gets 100 miles to the gallon. He said, I'd really like to talk about this, but I don't want to be embarrassed. Call him and find out if he's telling the truth. Because, you know, he knows that I do this work and I'm obsessed with it, and I also grew up in the car business. So anyway, I call this fella and he faxes me the specs on his car, and we have a conversation. And sure enough, he's one of 50 Americans driving an experimental technology made in Massachusetts, and for the last 14 months, he has averaged 105 miles to the gallon in town. 105 miles an hour. And then he says to me, but I only get 70 on the highway. Now, here's how this works. And this is really important because I know you care a lot about this stuff, and I will try to explain why you need a president on an issue like this, and why you just can't depend on the market to help you. Here's how it's basically a hybrid car on steroids. You know how the hybrid cars work. When you're on a battery at 25 miles an hour, then you flip over, right? This one is a booster pack which goes in the hybrid and gives you 40 more miles every single day for the battery. And all you do is plug it in at night. That means you can drive with a battery to 40 miles an hour before you flip into fuel. Once you do that, you're at 100 miles a gallon. And this may not be applicable to Montana so much, but think about America. In America, half the vehicles are driven 25 miles a day or less. Almost all of that in town. This technology has the potential of letting millions and millions and millions of people drive around all they want and use no gasoline. Now, think what it would mean to your budget if you drove a 100-mile-a-gallon car, even if it only got 70 miles on the highway. Think what it would mean to your country. Think what nice things we could say to the oil sellers. We could say, you know, we've been thinking about this. Why don't you just charge $200 or $300 a barrel? You may charge whatever you want now, because we're going to keep our money at home in our families' pockets and our children's future, building the jobs of tomorrow, cleaning up the planet, and taking control of our economic destiny. So what's this got to do with the presidential race? Why do you need a president for this to happen? 2 reasons. Number one, in Hillary's energy plan, before she ever knew about this guy, there is a tax credit for people who buy plug-in hybrids of up to $10,000 a car. And this unit costs $10,000. Now it'll go down in price as more are produced, but that's what it costs today. Most Americans couldn't afford to buy it. With this tax credit, it would be no more expensive than any other car. She believes, and I hope you agree, it is worth at least $10,000 a car to liberate America from oil and to help save the planet for the next generation. Number 2, even though I know at least one of the automakers is looking at incorporating this technology in 2 new models, they're not going to do it now because there are not enough batteries. You have to produce millions of these. And today, the only known element that will give you this kind of carrying capacity is lithium, and most of it is in the ground in South America. So you have to figure out what's the responsible way to mine it, how you're going to mass produce the batteries in a hurry, and as everybody here knows who deals with this, storing batteries creates its own set of environmental problems, and if you're not careful and you can't find some way to recycle them, if you put them in the ground, the material from the batteries can leach into the soil, get into the groundwater, contaminate it, and cause a lot of problems. So you don't want to just automatically change the way we get around without a serious long-term plan to manage how you're going to deal with these batteries. And secondly, keep in mind, if we started offering 100-mile-a-gallon cars tomorrow, millions of people would show up overnight. The good news is their bills would go down and they'd be more environmentally responsible. You'd also have to create a whole new industry figuring out how to responsibly recycle the steel and other things that are in all these cars that are going to be turned in. If you did it right, you would create another 1 million jobs. But the point is, you can't just change the way we move overnight without knowing how you're going to deal with the downside consequences of it, because there's no such thing as a totally free lunch in managing any environmental or energy challenge. And the fact that she has this strategic energy fund and has thought through this and is prepared to deal with it, I think is one of the reasons you ought to support her for president, because we do need to move this way and move in a hurry. Now, are essential for our economy. One, I think you ought to support her because she's got the only plan that provides health insurance to absolutely every single American, and without doing it, you cannot get control of health care costs. This is a very important issue, and I think dimly understood. The reason the American Nurses Association endorsed Hillary for president in the primary is they said she had the only health care plan that would absolutely insure everyone, and that unless you do it, health care will continue to spiral out of control. Most people in this room, I would imagine, experience the health care crisis as a problem of cost. Is that fair to say? It's so expensive. Okay, I just want to tell you, you can elect anyone you want. You can elect Hillary or Senator Obama or Senator McCain. None of them will be able to bring this economy back if you keep doubling health care costs every 7 years. Because there will not be enough money left to educate people at the University of Montana, to invest in new technologies, to allow a reasonable amount of consumer spending on other things. There will not be enough money left. You cannot keep doing this. Now, I will try to persuade you in 2 minutes that you can't fix the cost problem without the coverage problem. Raise your hand if you know somebody without any health insurance. Just look around here. We're in a university crowd. Look at this. Okay, here's what I want to say. If we were having this meeting in any other wealthy country, in Canada, in Europe, any European country, or Japan, and this question were asked from the podium, not a single solitary soul would raise their hand. Nobody, because all these other countries have figured out how to provide affordable health care to everyone. And if we took their systems, any of them, and brought it to America, everyone would be covered. The health outcomes would be better because there would be primary and preventive care to stop big bad things from happening, and it would cost you $700 billion less. That's the size of the trade deficit. Now, if you give me just a minute, I think I can persuade you that you can't fix this unless you cover everybody. And that's why you ought to be for Hillary on this issue. First of all, not covering people costs at least $250 billion. Not covering people. At least 250 of the 700 billion. It's actually more, but I'll just simplify here. Think about it. Think about your own experience. Every time you make a health insurance payment, you are contributing to $50 billion the health insurance companies spend every year trying not to insure you. Think of it as your uninsurance premium. I pay an uninsurance premium. Think about it. I'm sorry, you have a pre-existing condition. I'm sorry, you have a health insurance policy, it just doesn't cover what you need right now, even though you thought it did when you bought it. I'm sorry, you have a policy, it does cover what you need, but you know what you need is really expensive. So I went back and reviewed your application, you left line 3 blank, you're canceled. Now some version of this has happened to a lot of people here in this crowd. So if everyone were covered, it would be illegal to do that. Illegal to get your records and try not to insure you. Illegal to get your records and say, well, I'll insure you if you pay 4 times the regular amount. You save $50 billion off of that. Second problem, bigger one. 30 cents of every dollar in health care goes to paperwork. Now, is there a business in Missoula that can keep its doors open if they lose 30% of the revenues on paperwork? I don't think so. But think about it. First, there is the system itself. Hundreds of companies writing thousands of policies, they all cover different things, and they have different sized insurance pools. Albert Einstein couldn't keep up with this. Second, there is the incentive not to pay. Now, I just went through this with a member of my own family who didn't have a last name as recognizable as mine and had the same heart surgery I did. And they were insured through his wife's policy, and she is an emergency room pediatric nurse at a major university with a great health insurance policy. So he has heart surgery. They say, well, we're not sure you're covered. We're not sure you didn't have a pre-existing condition you didn't disclose. Now, they know he's covered. He knows he's covered. But this is a good chunk of money, right? So they play tag with paperwork for 3 or 4 months, and then they fork over the payment. Meanwhile, they earn the interest on the premium money for 3 or 4 months before the hospitals and the doctors and everybody was paid. This game goes on every day in America. It may be good for the individual company. It's a disaster for you. 30 cents on the dollar. Medicare is 3 cents on the dollar. 3 cents. So here's somebody's alternative. You like what you got, you can keep it. But if you don't like it, if you don't have it, if you cannot afford it anymore, you have an absolute right to buy into the same plan that ensures federal employees and members of Congress and our families. It's a very good plan with lots of choices. It's much less expensive than anything else you can buy. Then you take the savings you get from cutting the administrative costs and eliminating the $50 billion and give subsidies to low-income workers, to small businesses, to family farmers trying to help their employees, so that nobody finds it unaffordable, because nobody, by law, can be charged more than a certain fixed percentage of their income for health care. Now, that is the only way to fix this. We can go on pretending that somehow America can swim against the tide, but this is killing the economy. The stories of injustice are heartrending. You know, the number of people with kids that are really profoundly ill and they can't get any insurance for them, so people are deciding, you know, what are they supposed to do, quit work so they can get government assistance? Just those stories alone, it would break your heart. There are people all over your country thinking, families, that they should get a divorce. I just met 2 of these families. Guy has a trucking business. Goes broke over fuel prices, goes to work for a contract as a contract truck driver. Severely disabled child with a neurological disorder the child was born with. The woman comes to one of Hillary's rallies, she says, what are we supposed to do? Work so we can eat and let our child die? Or starve so our child can get medical care? She said, now they tell me the only option is for us to divorce. Then I can get the medical care and my husband can earn money. She said, that's not in my value structure. I thought this was supposed to be a family values country. Look, it turns out that doing the morally right thing is the economically essential thing. You have to decide if you believe that, and if you're tired of making excuses and you want to make progress. But if you are, you should vote for Hillary for president on this health care issue, because she's right on the issue and it is necessary to move America forward. I think you should be for her because she got the most aggressive plan to deal with the mortgage foreclosure crisis. Over 1 million fellow Americans, or our fellow Americans and their families, lost their homes last year. We're on track for more to lose it this year. There's a big debate about how we ought to just let a lot of these people be foreclosed on because they never should have gotten the loans in the first place, or they never should have asked for the loans. Let me tell you what the consequences are so far. The homeowners of America, the people that didn't get foreclosed on, have had the value of their homes go down $1.9 trillion, and that's the only savings most families have. So if you let this happen, it will further diminish the value of America's homeowners. And I'll tell you exactly how much, depending on where the house is. Every time a home is foreclosed on, it has a negative impact on the American economy between $220,000 and $320,000. Hillary says we can't afford to let this catapult us into a recession. So I would let everyone who is making their present mortgage payment and told the truth about it when they got the mortgage, stay in their house at the same mortgage payment for the next 5 years instead of being thrown out because they're told they got to make a higher mortgage payment. Now this is just like car batteries. This is not free. If you did what she wants, then the federal government would need a modest amount of money to recycle a lot of these mortgages so they could redo the terms and people could stay at the same outflow. And each state would get some money, a total of about $30 billion, to go in and mitigate the losses mortgage companies would otherwise sustain. You don't have to do this, but here's what's going to happen if you don't. You let another 1 million or 2 million people be thrown out of their houses. Then within 2 years, we will be spending $300 or $400 million to clean up a mess that could have been stopped for 30. One of the things you hire a president to do is to stay ahead of the curve and stop big, bad things from happening. It's another reason I think you should support the president. Now, with regard to the economy, the fourth reason reason I think you should support her is because of the education issues. First, she believes we should have universal pre-kindergarten to get all our kids off to an even start. Second, she believes No Child Left Behind is a failure. It doesn't work. The only place where this law is doing any good is in this tiny percentage of our schools, maybe 5% at the outside, that are so dysfunctional that kids are getting all the way to the 8th grade.